So. All right. Why don't we start with that? So the main reason why we've had pre-meetings in the past is to just have an informal discussion on the items on the agenda. And if you have questions, just kind of brief you. You can talk more one-on-one with the planner that's involved with that project. And that's the main reason why we've had a pre-meeting. If you don't feel like we need to have a pre-meeting, we don't need to. We've just had them because historically the planning commissions have felt that it helped things go more smoothly. But if you don't feel like we need one, I'm totally game on not having a pre-meeting.
It's the way it's always been done.
So did they have treats in these pre-meetings?
We could have treats in the pre-meeting if you'd like, but maybe I'd like to encourage not to have treats if you're not going to have a pre-meeting. So it would discourage you. You know, we don't want to just have a meeting to meet. We want to make it, you know, worth your, you know, reason for coming in. So in the rules of order, Cortland, does it have that it's required or is it optional? I see Cortland has the rules of order.
Yeah, in the rules of order, it does mention pre-meetings. It gives the option at, I guess, at the discretion of the planning commission of having a field trip on the fourth Tuesday of each month at the hour of 3 p.m. or at such other appropriate times. And then it says, in the event that a field trip is not held, then a pre-meeting will be held at 4:30 p.m. So it does look like that would require amending the rules of order, but that could certainly be done if the planning commission chooses to. So my suggestion would be, if you're going to do that, you put it on a future agenda as opposed to taking action right now, since it's not on the agenda for tonight.
Sorry, totally. Yeah, that makes sense for administrative side.
Commissioners, do you have any questions regarding this item? This came before you last month. There didn't seem to be any questions at the time. We haven't added any conditions for recommendation of final approval. And they have met the preliminary conditions of approval. Do you have any questions for me this evening regarding this item? If not, I'm sure Steve is anxious to come back up here for this.
I just forgot we have administrative items. My fault. Cool. The first item is a text amendment. County-driven text amendment. The purpose of it is to make the subdivision amendment process a little bit easier and a little less expensive for people that are just adjusting property boundaries within a subdivision. So like if you've got a neighbor that has a fence on your property and you've been meaning to fix that boundary, you could just file for a lot adjustment. It still requires a surveyed subdivision plat, it still requires some review, but just not to the extent of like a final and a preliminary review. And this option would also eliminate a requirement for a public meeting. We think it would cut down time from about 3 months to about 1 month to get approved. Now this is only for small lot adjustments and removing any irrelevant information on a subdivision plat. So yeah, we brought this to the Western Beaver Planning Commission last week, and they forwarded a positive recommendation to the County Commission. We are still working on some minor language changes with our attorney's office. And so when we do have the public hearing, I'll propose that your recommendation be to forward a positive recommendation for county commissioners with an allowance for staff and attorneys to make some slight changes that keep the spirit of what we're proposing. Does you have any questions on that?
Say minor lot adjustment, is there like a definition of what a minor lot adjustment is?
We would just say if you're adjusting the boundary of a lot or multiple lots within the same subdivision. Now there isn't really a definition of a small adjustment or a minor adjustment. I guess that's just my terminology, but it really comes down to if you're adjusting a boundary. Now, if you're creating any new lots, that automatically requires the full preliminary and final review. But if you are, let's say that someone built their garage or something on their neighbor's piece and they needed to adjust the boundary. We see it probably a handful of times every year. People need to come amend their plat with their neighbors. We don't actually define what a small adjustment would be.
And what's an internal lot restriction? No longer applicable.
Yeah, so this would also allow someone to remove an internal lot restriction that we deem not applicable. An example might be if a developer placed a buildable area on a lot and there wasn't any real reason for that. Maybe there was no slope or no geologic hazards or no setback issue, or maybe there wasn't a stream corridor. They just decided that they wanted to put a buildable envelope on the property and that it wasn't applicable. They could say they could ask for that to be removed, and if we found that wasn't applicable anymore, we could approve that subdivision change.
So would that require a new Mylar for that kind of a thing?
Yeah, every one of these would require a Mylar to be printed out and signed and recorded with the county.
And is it state law that requires the new Mylar?
I believe it is state subdivision law that requires any subdivision amendment to be printed out and approved by the county on a Mylar. Now, there is an option there. We're actually working on one that says it can be done digitally. And you don't actually need to print out the Mylar. But was your question more about the printing or the actual just hiring a surveyor?
I'm just thinking of keeping the cost down for something like this. If you got to go redo a Mylar for the entire subdivision,
Yeah, it does.
it's a lot of
require-
money.
Yeah, unfortunately, or I would almost look at it as fortunately, and I can explain why, but state code does say that any plat amendment has to be done through an amended subdivision plat, which means Mylar.
Okay, now that this could be, I mean, the purpose is notice to the public, right?
I don't understand the question.
Well, if you've got this, for example, an envelope on this subdivision lot. I'm thinking that could easily be done by some document that's recorded in the chain of, in the records, recorded records. So it shows up on a title report that envelope is no longer applicable. And that would be way inexpensive compared to a whole new subdivision Mylar.
If that owner is seeking the county's approval, though, of removing that, the only way to do that is through an amended plat. Not through a document that eliminates it. Plat restrictions can only be removed through amended plats.
According to state law.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
This does, the intent behind it, we do get quite a few people, as I mentioned, that come in and they're like, I got to do what? To just adjust the boundary between their neighbor. If the fee for a 2-lot subdivision is $1,300, and the review time, the average review time is about 3 months to get through and record. We think the fee will be about half from what we've seen, and that the review time will only take about a month. So it does cut down on cost, and it does cut down on time. We kind of have that mindset of thinking of the lot owner. So,
The way that I read it, I thought basically what we were talking about was just taking it out of having to come formally before us for the administrative approval. Is that incorrect?
it's not correct. So a 9-lot subdivision, a brand new 9-lot subdivision doesn't actually have to come before the planning commission at all. It could be approved administratively in what we call administrative approval meeting by Director Grover. Currently, if someone wants to do one of these adjustments, they have to get on that agenda. And we have that agenda. Usually it's about once or twice a month that we have that agenda. This proposed language would just eliminate a requirement for a meeting altogether.
Okay. But they still work everything out with you all, obviously meet all the requirements. It's just not about having that formal meeting with the
That's right.
director. Okay.
Yeah, no formal meeting with the director, but it does still have to meet all of the plat requirements. There's still some review that happens. We just want to cut down on that time.
Okay.
We'll talk about the next project. So this, you guys are familiar with this one. This was before you in August. This is the John Lewis rezone. So you've got 3 areas that are being rezoned. I'll just remind you, it's Eagle Crest and the Exchange, and then an area called Kobe Branch. The reason that it got tabled was so that Kobe Branch could be discussed a little bit more. So in the meeting in August, it was tabled so we could discuss the general plan, and we could discuss the village area and how it applies to the Kobe Branch development as John has proposed it to be rezoned. We had that work session. I think all of you were there in September. And then during that work session, we looked at the general plan, and John showed a couple of plans that he could propose. One of them didn't include any open space. It was all just 3 and 5 acre lots everywhere. The other plan has significant amount of open space and trails. So we had that conversation, and John's asked to be put on the agenda again tonight for a decision from the planning commission. And then just again, you'd be making a recommendation to the planning commission. And in my staff report, I've included 3 recommendations. You're welcome to look at those and to take those. You're also welcome to come up with your own recommendation. But in my presentation, I'll try to be brief, but I do want to hit on a few points of the general plan that we talked about in the last meeting. And then I think there's been some changes that have occurred in the proposal based on some conversations with John and the people at Trappers Ridge above. So.
We could probably chat about that. Because it deals with rules and procedures. And Cortland, you want to?
Some order. All right. How would you like me to do that? Do you want me to read through the conflict of interest rules? You want me up there? Okay. Sure. Yes. This microphone isn't super loud. Can you hear me okay? Okay. In the rules of order, it talks about a conflict of interest, and then just kind of in general terms talks about the process, and then it goes into what would disqualify a planning commission member from participation. So to begin with, it says a planning commission member with a conflict of interest in a matter before the commission shall state that such a conflict of interest exists and withdraw from participation in the public hearing, work session, or regular meeting on such matter. So the basic rule is if you know you have a conflict of interest, you declare the conflict and then you withdraw from participation during that matter. It says next, a member of the planning commission who feels he or she or any other member of the commission may have a conflict of interest on any matter that is on the commission agenda. This means, again, it's a question mark. Shall explain the possible conflict to the commission. The commission shall then vote to decide whether an actual, apparent, or reasonably foreseeable conflict of interest does exist, and whether the commissioner should withdraw from participation and voting. So in other words, if there's a question, if it's not really black and white, the proper procedure for that is to bring it before the planning commission through declaring the possible conflict, and then the planning commission members vote. Reasonably, that person wouldn't vote, but probably the other planning commission members. And so that would be what to do in those gray area situations is you say, this is the situation. I see a possible conflict, but I don't feel that it necessarily rises to that. So I think we need to bring that to a vote. Next, it says, if a commissioner has a conflict of interest, which would be if they recognize that, or if it's voted upon, then that person shall not participate in the discussion and voting on that matter, nor attempt to use his or her influence with other commissioners before, during, or after the meeting. A commissioner who has a conflict of interest shall leave the commission chamber during the time in which the matter in question is being discussed and voted upon. So that tells you what to do if there is a conflict. Not only do you abstain from voting, but you actually leave during the discussion and the vote. The next section talks about what might constitute a conflict of interest. It says no member of the planning commission shall participate in the discussion of an application or vote on an application or any action when any of the following conditions exist. There are two categories. The first one is any of the following have a direct or substantial financial interest in the proposal. Members of the planning commission or the member's spouse, brother, sister, child, parent, father-in-law, mother-in-law, any business in which the member is then serving or has served within the past 2 years, or any business with which the member is negotiating for or has an arrangement or understanding concerning prospective partnership or employment. So if one of those businesses or one of those family members has a direct or substantial financial interest in the proposal, that would be a disqualifier. The other disqualifier is kind of the general catch-all. For any other reason, the member has determined that participation in the decision cannot be in an impartial manner. And possibilities for that are endless, but it's also very discretionary. It doesn't require leaving and being disqualified from participation in every conceivable situation. It's if you've determined that you cannot participate in an impartial manner, then that would be a reason to disqualify yourself from participation in that item. And that is the extent of what that says. I mean, it says whether or not, the last part here, disclosure of potential conflict of interest, whether or not he or she is disqualified, a public official shall disclose any potential conflict of interest as required by state law. There is a state law disclosure requirement that is required to be done, even if it doesn't require you to leave the discussion and not vote on it. So I have to declare. So that's a lot of language here that leaves still some gray area, and I fully recognize that. And typically in those situations, again, that would be presented to the other members of the planning commission to vote upon. And the other thing I would say is administrative items are the ones where usually there's a much greater need to show a lot of care in this. If Commissioner Montgomery owns a parcel of property and he is applying to subdivide it so that he can sell lots, then that would be a pretty obvious one where he would need to declare that and then recuse himself from the discussion and vote. If it's a legislative item, there's generally a lot more leniency in the law as far as conflicts of interest are concerned. And that includes rezone applications and things of that sort, where especially if somebody else is making that application and a member of the planning commission, has some kind of interest in property there or other kind of interest, but it's covering, multiple properties, and it's not necessarily something that's, maybe financially benefiting, or even if it is, financially benefiting in some indirect way, there is some leniency there, and that would be things that the planning commission would want to take into consideration if there is a vote on whether or not somebody should be disqualified from participating. Let's take
In a legislative option, is there, so it doesn't sound like there's much impartiality required, is kind of what you're, right?
yes.
So in a legislative item, it needs to be, how do we view that more? Is it more, we look at it from a financial gain and not from a, can I be impartial? Do I cross? Looking at option, right? The first option, I'm good there. Second one is partial pretty much. And
Right, and just by their very nature, legislative items, I would say any vote you make is expressing an opinion. It's not really so much a partiality or impartiality question when you're addressing legislative items, because you are making a policy recommendation to the county commissioners. In an administrative item, on the other hand, your job is to look at the application before you, determine whether it meets the ordinance, sometimes determine whether there are conditions that should be imposed based on actual facts that would, for instance, in a conditional use permit, mitigate detrimental circumstances or something like that. But that is based on code compliance, determining whether something should be approved or not. And so that is where the impartiality really comes into play, is those administrative items. So a lot of times if you ask me, I may or may not have an opinion, but the right answer is going to be the planning commission should vote on it, if it's a gray area.
Cortland, kind of the key is, if I understand it right, if you can't be impartial, you got a conflict of interest.
That's one of the criteria. But again, that's easy to say, but it's sometimes hard to determine.
Yeah.
And again, especially with a legislative item.
Well, and it's kind of de facto with an administrative item. If it's your proposal
Yeah,
that you're voting on, yeah,
that's a pretty clear.
it's
That's
de facto,
one- that's one
you've got a
extreme.
conflict.
Yeah, that's the extreme end of the spectrum.
Thank you.
so we've got just a couple minutes.
Do you mind if I go over what happened in previous county commission meetings while we have a little bit of time so that we speed things along? On a real exciting note, our code enforcement officer, Iris Hennon, went to the National Code Enforcement Conference, and she received the National Code Enforcement Officer of the Year for all of America. So it's pretty cool that we have a person within Weber County who received that recognition. So that's a really cool thing. They gave an award to her today in the county commission meeting. Also in the county commission meeting today, they approved Osprey subdivision phase 1 final approval. So just so you're aware of that. And those were the main things that have happened since we last met. So.
I have a question for maybe Rick or Marta. Is the next Ogden Valley Planning Commission November 29th? Is there just one in November?
There's just one. There's no work session. November 1st is the Western Weber work session. And then there's no meeting for either Ogden Valley or Western Weber on the following because that's elections. So we moved Western Weber, I believe, to the 14th, and then you guys follow up. And actually, you don't follow up then because we moved it from Thanksgiving week to the following week. So.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to call the meeting of the Ogden Valley Planning Commission to order. Please rise and join me. All right, let the record indicate that all members are present, all members of the Planning Commission are present with the exception of Commissioner Johnson. It doesn't look like we're having any minutes. So for tonight, we have an administrative item and a couple of legislative items. Do any of the commissioners, planning commissioners, have any conflict of interest or ex parte communications to declare for any items on today's?
Yes, I have a conflict of interest, and I believe we just found out I need to state it clearly. So I have a direct family member that is financially involved in the bridges, which is in administrative item 1, as well as the exchange Eagle Crest Kobe, which is legislative item 2.2. So I will step outside during those discussions.
Okay. I've noted the potential conflict of interest. That's them at the beginning of that. Are there any others?
No.
Okay.
On item number 1, the Parkside. I think last time I recused myself from this because my wife owns a home on Snowflake Circle, which is in the neighborhood. I'm not sure that I needed to do that. I wanted to avoid the appearance of a conflict, but I don't believe I have any reason I can't be impartial on this.
So should we have a vote? Have a vote. So just to restate, your family member is outside of the current development.
Correct. That's correct.
Okay. All right. So all in favor of Commissioner Burton remaining and not excusing himself?
Aye.
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 The ayes have it.
Thank you.
Address one thing, let's see. We don't have any consent items, so let's move right into administrative item for one. Commissioner, that you would excuse yourself. Go over this and from there. Tammy. Let's see, Rick, would you please explain the decision type?
Yes, this is an administrative item. No public comment is required on this, no public hearing either. You will be making a decision and Ms. Aydelotte will be presenting this item.
Good evening, commissioners. This is a request for final approval of Parkside PRUD Phase 3. As was previously stated, this is part of the Bridges CUP, which was approved back in 2016. This subdivision came before you at the end of September for preliminary approval and was granted that preliminary approval. Just to kind of recap, let me pull up a couple of slides I've got here. This is a 16 lot subdivision in the RE15 zone. Now, as part of this CUP approval for this planned residential unit development, there is some flexibility with the lot standards, and these were presented to you with preliminary approval. Water and sewer has already been addressed and approved by Wolf Creek. This request for a recommendation of final approval includes ultimately at the county commission level an acceptance of public roads, both on Howe Drive and 4475 East. These were the preliminary conditions of approval. These are contained in your staff report. These have been addressed or will be addressed prior to appearing on a county commission agenda. So at this time, staff would recommend final approval subject to all review agency requirements and based upon the findings outlined in the staff report. The developer is here if you have any questions for him at this time. Any questions for me at this time?
All right. Well, no questions. I'll entertain a motion.
Make a motion. I move the planning commission recommend send a recommendation of final approval of Parkside Phase 3 PRUD subdivision consisting of 16 lots. This is file number UVP080922. Based upon the findings set forth in the staff report and the staff hasn't recommended any conditions, and so that's the recommendation. That's the motion that we convey. We send to the county commission a recommendation of final approval.
It would actually be forwarded on once they get their escrow and everything into the county commission. And Ms. Aydelotte did have in the staff report that it meet review agency requirements as a condition.
Okay,
If you choose to add that.
that it meet the all the staff recommended conditions set forth in the report.
We vote a second.
I'll second.
Portland, are we clear? Or do we need to restate it?
I think if it was stated that it's recommendation for approval based on, I think I heard you say the conditions listed in the staff report.
Yes.
Okay. And that was based on what?
May I restate the motion?
Sure, sure. Yeah, that might be clear.
I move that the planning commission approve a recommendation of final approval of Parkside Phase 3 PRUD subdivision consisting of 16 lots. File number UVP080922, based upon the findings and subject to the conditions set forth in the staff report.
Okay, do we have to have a second it again? I think.
I would.
All right, do I have a second? Second. All right, we have a motion for approval as outlined in staff report. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Part of the vote. All commissioners voted in the affirmative. The exception of those absent. Okay. Let's move on to legislative item 2. Which would be the ZTA 2022-2, a public hearing for consideration of a county initiated text amendment to the subdivision ordinance to exempt lot adjustments from preliminary and final subdivision review. Now, do we have to open it as a public hearing?
Yes, and close it as
We
well.
have to vote it. Don't we do that when we're ready to take public comment, or do we just have to
Yep.
change it now?
No, just when you're ready to open the public hearing, and we may want to invite Commissioner Wampler
Yes.
back in. But yeah, this is a legislative item. You will need to have a public hearing and you'll need to open and close the public hearing.
Yeah. Commissioner Wambert, should see the run grab her. So Rick, you already started describing the decision type. You want to keep that going?
You bet. You'll be forwarding on a recommendation to the county commission on this item, and then they'll make the final decision. Mr. Burton is going to be presenting this item, and then after Mr. Burton presents, you will open and close the public hearing.
Hi, commissioners. Yeah, this should only take a few minutes for me to present this. ZTA 2022-02. This is a county-driven ordinance amendment proposal. The intent of this is to make the subdivision process a little easier and a little bit cheaper for existing lot owners who need to adjust boundaries between other lots in their subdivision, or if they're proposing to eliminate plat restrictions that are no longer applicable. What do I mean by plat restrictions that are no longer applicable are, for example, sometimes people will show setbacks on their lots, which really we don't recommend that. We see a lot of older plats that show building setbacks, and maybe that building setback changed, for example, and that really, if it's on the plat, it's kind of restricting that individual from building where the new ordinance might allow them. Another example would be if a neighbor encroached on another neighbor's property. They're in the same subdivision. Maybe they built their fence in the wrong spot. Rather than turn the fence down, if the two neighbors agree upon it, they can adjust the boundary. It still has to meet the zoning. And I'll also mention, if anyone's proposing any new lots in a subdivision, that would require a full subdivision review, not a lot adjustment. So really what it comes down to is this does a few things. One of them is it eliminates the requirement for a public meeting. We feel that if it's really a lot line adjustment that meets zoning and no new lots are being proposed, that there's really no need for a public meeting. And by doing that, that does actually eliminate quite a bit of time. We only have meetings, as you know, every so often. So that would cut down on the time for one of these lot owners. And then also this reduces the fee. We feel that it'd be about half the cost of the normal subdivision fee. This lot adjustment wouldn't apply if someone wants to bring property from outside of a subdivision into a subdivision. That would just be the normal subdivision review process. And we've noticed for a public hearing, and our recommendation to you is that you forward a positive recommendation to the county commission. I'll ask that you do allow some flexibility in the language. We are doing a little bit of back and forth with our attorney's office on some of the language changes, but we don't feel it's anything major that's changing. We feel that it keeps the spirit of what's being proposed. Happy to answer any questions if you have any.
We're asking for is that in the motion that we have be open-ended to some guidelines that carry the spirit of inside subdivision adjustments.
Just to allow staff to make edits based on attorney recommendations. We vetted the language through our county surveyor's office and our county engineering office, and they're comfortable with this as well.
So what's the changes that you're? I'm sorry. Since something you mentioned that you want us to be careful because it's going to be reviewed by the attorney's office, but yet you've already done that. What was it you just said there?
I have not implemented in the staff report that you have. I have not implemented Cortland's proposed changes to the language that you're reviewing. So he's added a few things, and he's welcome to speak up and talk about those. But I don't feel that they were anything that I needed to pull this off the agenda because of. I feel they're small enough that this could still move forward, and you're pretty much going to see the exact same language go to the county commission. There just may be a few word edits from Cortland.
Cortland, what are those minor changes? Just to be clear.
I'm pulling that up right now. And I will note that Steve sent this to me to review a few weeks ago, and I got my changes. It took me a couple of weeks to get back to him, and I think it was on the day of the Western Weber Planning Commission meeting that I got my changes to him, so it was too late to amend anything before presenting it to the Western Weber Planning Commission. So that was my responsibility, but that isn't in the staff report. What I suggested to him, and this was based on looking at a couple of Utah code sections that talk about lot line and boundary adjustments. The lines 3 and 4 say it's exempt from subdivision application submittal, but it does appear that they actually do need to submit an application for a subdivision amendment. So I thought that wording might need to be tweaked a little bit to clarify that we're not talking about maybe a full-blown process for subdivision amendment, but just some more, maybe a different type of application for a minor change. I mentioned that on lines 17 and 18, it would be good, in my opinion, to say an electronic copy of the proposed amended plat that complies with Utah Code Section 1727A 608, prepared by a surveyor licensed in the state of Utah. So that would be just to indicate in here the requirements that it would have to follow, meaning that statutory section is the one that governs this. The third recommendation was adding something in section B somewhere that says the county will send all notices required by that statute, because that wasn't completely clear here. And then the final one, which may be the biggest sticking point, is that statute appears to require a public meeting to be held, which may defeat the whole purpose of this revision. I will say there are about 4 different code sections which I listed in my email to Steve, that talk about this type of amendment or other types of boundary adjustment. And it isn't necessarily easy to piece them all together because of the way they're worded. But they do. The one that seems most directly applicable refers to this other one, 1727A608. That's the one that talks about, in some circumstances, you have to hold a public hearing, but then if it's only to adjust a lot line in this type of situation, it says the land use authority may consider it at a public meeting instead of having to hold a public hearing. So we need to sort out whether or not that's really going to be required or whether that is talking about something different. So those are the changes I had suggested.
I'll also mention, I didn't find anywhere in my research of the state subdivision code that mandates a public meeting. It does, the only time that term meeting comes up is that one section where it says that they may consider that a public meeting.
Yeah, instead of a public hearing.
Yeah, so
So-
we're thinking really, if we can get Cortland to agree with us, we're thinking that there really is no need for a public meeting, but yeah, if you think that there is and if Cortland thinks that there is, then
So-
we do too, so.
So we'll see whether Steve can persuade me. But I mean, I do agree generally the word may gives discretion. So it depends on if you're reading that as an alternative to a public hearing or if you're reading that as complete discretion. So
So if we were to push, or if we were to forward a positive recommendation, the county commission was to say yes. Does it change, does it overrule any of those code changes? Is it a county code or is that a state code that we're changing? That you're mentioning where it might still require a meeting or a hearing?
the state code is the one that requires, in a lot of circumstances, a public hearing. But then it says in these other circumstances, the public hearing requirement of subsection 1D does not apply, and the land use authority may consider at a public meeting one of these petitions. So if it doesn't apply, then we're good to go. And this is in state code. But we will be amending the county code to streamline the process for these, I guess, simpler situations.
Question. Hypothetical. Lot 1 and 2 owners want to adjust their boundary because a fence got put in the wrong place or something, a few feet. How would they make application? Would these two owners make the application for the adjustment?
Under the proposed language,
Yes.
one of them, this is how we currently do it, but one of them could make the initial application, but both of them will actually need to sign the subdivision plat before.
Yeah. So the directly affected parties would be, in essence, a party to the application. Okay.
Any questions?
Steve? What was the genesis of this? Who brought this to the forefront?
I did. So I manage the current planning subdivisions, conditional use permits, all the current planning projects that come through our office. And I've gotten a lot of feedback from surveyors as well as property owners of why does it have to take so much time? Why is it so expensive to just amend a boundary with my neighbor? We agree upon the boundary. Let's just make it easier. And we've gotten the thumbs up from the county commission to start this process, and we just feel it's a win-win for everyone. So that's the genesis of it.
I congratulate you.
Thanks.
You're decluttering things. That's good.
Trying. Thanks.
Okay. I will now open the item for public comment or public hearing. Please come forward, state your name and address for the record prior to making your comments.
Typically
It doesn't say that I have to in here, but I don't know if that's true or not. It
have to what?
says I can open it for public comment,
Okay.
but
Generally,
tell
we've done
me, Bob, give
we've
me-
done that through a motion usually, and a second, and a vote, and the same with closing it.
I'll make a motion to open the public hearing. I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Please come forward, state your name and address for the record prior to making your comments. Person speaking for a committee or board will be given 5 minutes. All other individuals will be entitled to 2 minutes. Prior to speaking, anyone who needs more time to present evidence must ask for more time. Okay, do we have anybody online? Online, if you can hear me, you want to raise your hand with the little hand icon and we'll press it that way. Okay, not hearing any comment. Do I have a motion to close public hearing, public comment?
Sure, I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Does staff have any further comments? Questions? All right, with that, not hearing any, I'll hear a motion.
I'll make a motion. I move to forward a positive recommendation to the county commission for the proposed text amendment ZTA 2022-02. This recommendation is subject to the requirements and findings in the staff report. And to add a third requirement or a third item to allow some flexibility to the county staff and attorneys to make some minor adjustments to the language of the text amendment.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All right. The motion is for recommendation of approval as discussed and to also allow for some legal clarity with the items discussed. And all in favor?
Aye.
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 Part of the vote is unanimous. Okay. Moving right along, I'm going to go ahead and ask Commissioner Wampler to introduce herself. We move to item 2.2, consideration of a request for approval of a zoning map amendment to rezone property from RE15, RE20, FR3, OR1, F5, CVR1, and AV-3 to the master plan development overlay zone. Commissioner Rick, would you please explain the decision?
You bet. This is a legislative item you'll be forwarding a recommendation on to the county commission. You've already had the public hearing on this item, so there is no public hearing that's required. You will listen to Steve, and if you have questions for the applicant, you're more than welcome to ask questions, and then you need to make a decision, or you should make a decision.
Commissioners, I should have asked how you'd like to do this in the pre-meeting that we had. So in August, I went through the whole rezoning request, and it ended up getting tabled because of some issues with Kobe branch that I'll talk about. But did you want me to go over the entire request again, or are you familiar enough with it to maybe just talk about Kobe and the last work session we had?
Is ever good with just one part? Okay. All right. Sounds like we'll just hear about that one part of it.
Excellent. So you can see initially there was a public hearing. It was held on August 23rd, and the Planning Commission tabled the decision so that a work session could be held in September, in which the Kobe development would be discussed to better understand how that proposal relates to the county's form-based code and small area plans and the general plan. So you might remember in September 27th, we did hold that work session. And a few of the things we talked about were, I'll show this map here. One of them was this map, which is in the county's current ordinances. It's the form-based, village-based zoning that we have adopted in Old Town Eden and New Town Eden areas. And the reason we talked a little bit about this map was because it shows a Wolf Creek area And the reason that it shows that is because the general plan tells us to do some, what we call small area planning in certain areas with higher density and with potential for higher density. And so we pointed out that this Wolf Creek area does include the Kobe development as proposed today as an area that could contain some small area planning. The other thing we talked about at that meeting was the Ogden Valley General Plan. One thing I wanted to show is this map. I put a couple quotes from the general plan up here as well, but this is the open lands map from the Ogden Valley General Plan. I've got a red circle around the Kobe area just to show you what it shows for this area. And you can kind of see over here, it says that it's existing ag and open lands. General plan talks about preserving those ag and open lands to the extent possible. General plan also, I'll point a little, just a quote from it down here, talks about, it says that widespread downzoning of the kind undertaken in 1998 is not a palatable option for Valley residents and landowners. So we've got this general plan that says we should preserve some ag open space that's there, but we shouldn't downzone it. So what are the options there, right? So one option is the owner could come in and plat a bunch of 3 and 5 acre lots everywhere. They could do that today under today's zoning. The other option, which is what's being proposed, is to plat some units, but also to preserve some open space, provide some good street connectivity, provide some good active transportation and trails. So I just wanted to point out, those were some of the things we talked about in that last meeting. We as staff, although we're not, I want to make it clear that we're not advocating for this to be approved. We feel that it does meet the intent of the general plan. No, it's not preserving this property completely as open space. But again, we don't think that that's really possible unless the county's willing to downzone everything on this. Since we had our general plan, let's just move forward to, since we had our work session discussion, the developers met with the folks in the Trappers Ridge Homeowners Association. And there is a plan that's being proposed by the developer. They've actually changed their plan for Kobe. They haven't gone to the scale of hiring an engineer to redraw everything at this point. But what I've done is I've just gone and I've created just kind of a bubble diagram that shows what the change is. So Mr. Lewis is proposing, after meeting with Trappers Ridge, to move the townhomes a few hundred feet to the south in this general location where all these 2 acre and 3 acre lots are. And in exchange, there would be 2 and 3 acre lots up where the townhomes are. So that's the change that's been proposed by the developer. Yeah, I'm happy to let them speak about that a little bit. If you remember, our initial recommendation was that you forward a positive recommendation to the county commissioners, because we feel that this does implement quite a few parts of the general plan. In our current staff report, we've added some options for you to consider. The first option would be that you forward a positive recommendation to the county commissioners, as represented in the staff report, which was done before John confirmed that he wanted to work on option 2, which again, option 2 was this. Recommendation option 2, staff recommends that the planning commission forward a positive recommendation to the county commission regarding this proposal based on the layouts that you've seen and Kobe option 2, which we just talked about. And the third option would be that you table it until you can actually see what the change in properties look like. You're welcome to make any recommendation that you'd like. You're welcome to use these. This is a legislative item, so you don't have to approve a rezone. There's no right to a rezone. There's no right to more development rights. So the decision that you make, you do have some pretty broad deference in the decision and the finding that you make. Happy to answer your questions if you have any.
What did you mean by there's no right to development rights?
I meant that that a developer does not have a right to have their property rezoned. They have a right to build a home. They have a right to have farming on their property because that's what zoning currently allows. But they don't have a right to change the zone. That's only the legislative body that can do that. So through you and through the county commission, that's how that's to be done.
Would the applicant like to speak to this?
Thank you, Commissioners. John Lewis from Eden, Utah. Appreciate your time tonight. I think overall, from 30,000 feet, it's a large application, and to try to do an overlay over everything is pretty complicated. I'll come back to the bigger picture in a minute, but I think it'd be smart to focus on COBABE and some of the things that we talked about last time and how they've been adjusted since, and how I actually think this newer plan maybe makes more sense, certainly for the other community around me as well as myself. So, Steve did a good job of basically pointing out that COBABE is almost made up of two halves. There's the 3-acre stuff that's lower, which in this application, in both versions, option 1 and 2, I don't think we're going to rezone anything below in the 3-acre stuff. But the upper area, that upper half, we would simply be moving the townhomes in the 2 acres and switching them. That gives the trappers community a little bit more of a buffer, and the higher density down below, but not all the way down at the bottom, which didn't really make any sense last time we were talking about it. So the compromise is we take the upper half and we flip it. Because that's going to take a little bit of time to iron out. I met with them today with several of the members of the community and laid out kind of some parameters that I thought would be helpful that I'll stick to when I redraw this, but so that I don't get forgotten or lost. I wrote them all down. I had myself sign the letter. I sent it to everybody included here, and just so there's no, surprise or anything. And I'll just real quickly run through it. It's really just kind of between trappers and myself, but I wanted to publicly state for the record that those are the things I agreed to, and I will be coming back at a later date to get the actual project approved for phase 1. And, if you don't see these conditions in here, then don't approve it. So what we came up with, and I didn't give them everything they asked for, but we tried to come up with something that worked practically for both sides. So just briefly, the 7 things I can kind of focus on: the 15 houses that are the 2-acre lots, those will be now above the townhomes, but they will be below the power lines. So no houses will be above the power lines. And I know the goal really here is, how do I protect my view if I'm up at trappers? So one of the agreements is no houses above the power lines. And in those backyards between the power lines and trappers, we all want to try to preserve that as open as possible. I don't want to completely hamstring myself, but I did agree that anything that gets built up there has to be at least 200 feet away from another structure from a trapper's house. So you can't go build a big barn right up against the fence, which would be horrible. I did agree that the material of the barn would have to be wood, so we're not going to see metal barns or anything that they might find offensive. Again, they can't be within 200 feet of a trapper's house, no more than 25 feet tall. So I'm just picturing a 1-story barn with a gabled roof at the most. And this is if anybody even wants to do a barn. I'm not sure they're going to. And after we stood out there, I think we all agreed, why would anybody want to build a barn that wasn't more or less next to the house or near the house? Because, they'd have to tramp all the way through the power line easement, all the way up to the top to get to that barn. So just in case it happens, I'm putting restrictions on it, but my guess is it'll be down below. None of those barns can have any kind of ADU in them. And the barn, just in case someone decides to put together a big horse arena or something, the barn in the CCNRs won't be able to be bigger than the footprint of the house. So you picture a 4,000 square foot house, 2,000 of that's going to be above ground or main level. And so you wouldn't have a barn that's bigger than that. So trying to put some parameters in there that would keep it, realistic and away from the trappers community. Somebody else had an issue with fences. So I was going to make sure that fences would either be the existing barbed wire that's there or the buck and rail fence that I've been doing at my other projects. So those are the only 2. The green space belt that goes through all this and connects down to the 4-way at the bottom, as well as along the power lines. I want to make sure everyone understands that's still going to remain in this option B or option 2. So I think it's really important to retain the trails and the connectivity of all that. In terms of connectivity, I still think it's smart to connect all these roads, but where the Kobe Road connects to the Trappers, I'm hereby asking or requesting that we make that a fire crash gate for emergencies only and not a pass through. I think Trappers would rather have that. I'm fine with that. If the county's okay with that, then I'm fine with that, for the record. I also, want to publicly state that these parcels, once we subdevelop, will be prohibited from further subdivision. So if there's a 5-acre lot over there, it's not going to turn into 2 more lots later. I still need to stick to the 3-night minimum on the rentals. But I wanted to secondarily remind us it's a 3-night minimum, not a 3-day minimum. That can actually make a big difference. So there'll be 3-night. So again, the purpose of those rules that I put in writing and signed and gave to them was to kind of help guide us towards the CCRs, which will eventually be in front of you. And again, if you don't see these things, then I don't expect any kind of yes on those projects. If you back up and look at just the bigger application process, I think the reason this works for the general plan is because first and foremost, it starts the ball rolling for an Upper Valley sewer. I don't think I emphasized that enough last time, but this and Osprey together are going to make what's possible to do, the 200 connections we're going to need there. But we didn't just put the 200 lines of sewer line in or bond for that. That would have been really cheap. We're doing something big enough for 2,000. So whenever the future comes, whether it's Nordic or it's Liberty or whatever it's going to be, the trunk lines going through our projects are big enough to handle that for the future. So at some point when we hand this to the county or hand this to the Wolf Creek, sewer and water, it's going to be big enough to do that. Future infrastructure will need to be built and hopefully we'll help with that. But I feel really good that we've accomplished so much with sewer and even water for the resort at no expense to a taxpayer. This also pays them, the extension for Fairways Drive that accomplishes that, which is a big deal from connectivity. And if we ever have a emergency, you can get out of Trappers, you can get out of Fairways, you can get out of a lot of places that you can't currently. Obviously, there's no new density in this entire application. In fact, we're moving 80 TDRs someday when we find them on the valley floor to the Eagle Crest area. And until we find those TDRs and take them off the valley floor, we don't have a project over there. So, and this still retains probably 50 acres of open space as opposed to none if we were just to cut it up into 3-acre lots. So in summary, I feel pretty good about the compromise we found ourselves in with Trappers. But that's for you to decide. And I'll be glad to take questions if you have any.
John, have you, we're not here to talk about your CCNRs, but something comes to mind when we talk about putting larger lots at the top. Thank you for that. Are they all 2 acres? Is that what you said?
Well, the 2 acres that were below are now above, and they'll be the houses will be below the power lines. The backyards will go up to the fence, and then we'll be preserving the upper area, essentially open space, but they will be somebody's backyard, but you won't be able to put a barn there. So we've accomplished kind of both. And honestly, from an economic point of view, if I take the townhomes and I put them down lower, they don't have as good a view. So realistically, they'll sell for less. But the 2-acre lots are now slightly bigger up above and will sell for more. So in my mind, it's kind of a wash, but I can accomplish what Trappers was trying to do. So that's how it'll probably end up.
So the top row of homes, their property, when they buy a lot, it's going to go all the way to the existing
Right.
fence line between Trappers and Kogan.
Right.
What 2 acres isn't that big, but I wonder, can you think about or consider in your CCNRs eliminating the possibility of people buying those lots and then during the winter driving their snowmobiles around, in the summer, their 2-cycle dirt bikes?
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure I would do that because that's, that's what we do at Osprey. That's what we do at Legacy. Sound is a huge deal, and as well as visual. So our CCRs would certainly cover the same things we always cover, whether it's bridges or Legacy or anywhere else. So snowmobiles are great, and boats are great, and RVs are great, but keep them in the garage or the barn, and take them somewhere appropriate to ride.
Thanks.
Any questions? Comments?
You're not transferring density rights to make this happen, right? You said you have excess density rights that you'll transfer somewhere else at some point. from
Yeah,
this.
these come from the core,
The ones to this one come
Yeah.
from the core.
right?
In those lower lots, John, those, there's no zoning change there, right?
No, so there's no.
Those
fear
are
of
all
something
3 acre.
Happening later, yeah, they're just gonna remain the same zoning.
Okay.
So they're a 3 acre, but as you can see, we're still opening up open space and ponds and trails and everything else as well. All right, if you have any further questions. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for all your efforts to work with the neighbors and it sounds like this is a better plan.
Yeah, I think it's a good lesson for me and other developers that, compromise is a good thing. And sometimes they have better ideas than you do, and you rearrange it, you give it an earnest, honest look, and yeah, that actually would work. You're right. So I think that's where we find ourselves.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for meeting with them and trying to do the best you can to be a good neighbor.
Yeah.
Will say a lot of the CCNRs, it kind of concerns me. I know that that's part of it. I lean more towards the allow people to do what they want to do with their property.
Sure.
But I do appreciate you working with them. I think that's
Yeah.
come to an agreement.
It's really a fine line between you can do anything and you can't do anything. And that's a tough one. But when you are trying to lay out big communities and neighborhoods, you just have to expect the worst. I mean, somebody's going to do something stupid. So put a rule in now, because as Don will tell you, it's hard to change rules later. When you've got lots of HOA, people and opinions, and some people like them and some people don't, and you just got to do it up front.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Is there an opportunity today for public opinion, or is that done?
So we already took public hearing, or we had a public hearing, we took public comment. If the commission would like, we could open it up. We don't have to. So you want to make a motion?
All right, I'll just make a motion to entertain public comment and limit it to 2 minutes per person.
Thank you.
All in favor of the motion? Do I have a second? I guess I have to have a second. Do I have a second? Can I second it? I can't even remember the rules.
Yes, you may.
And I'll second it. I think we could hear a couple of comments. So I'll second it. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
I'm a no. All opposed?
I don't know.
No,
Guess we're gonna move forward.
Okay.
So. Not hearing any questions or comments?
Chair, is the county okay with the crash gate, or is that a pipe dream, or is that realistic?
That's something we would have to work through our engineering department on when we get to the subdivision level.
I have, I have a question about the density. Transferring core, is that a TDR?
You're transferring within the development boundary areas.
It's different than a TDR, right?
You are still transferring the rights, but it's allowed with the development agreement, and Steve can talk further on that.
That's what, I mean, that's what Wolf Creek's been doing for years, right? It's transferring within.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Okay. Well, any more questions or comments from the planning commissioners? Okay. I will hear a motion.
Make the motion. I move with respect to file number ZMA 2022-01. Consideration and action on a request for approval of a zoning map amendment to rezone property from RE15, RE20, FR3, 01, F5, CVR1 and AV3 to the master plan development overlay zone as set forth in the staff report. Based on the findings in the staff report and subject to the condition set forth in the staff report.
Did you want to select a recommendation?
Oh,
1, 2, or
A
3?
positive recommendation to the planning commission to adopt the zoning map amendment.
And in the options, would you go with
Or
recommendation?
with option number
1?
2.
Number 2.
Excuse me.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a second for recommendation for a positive recommendation for recommendation of option 2. It's a lot of recommendations. I have a question as it relates to this, I guess, when we're talking. Recommendation 1 and 2 seem to be kind of they kind of seem to be the same thing, just different layouts, right? There's no real change there. We're doing the same thing, right? We're rezoning. The zone is the same. I guess when we make a recommendation, we're saying that we like option 2 more than we like option 1. Is that in the layout that we've been shown? Is that basically what we're saying?
Yes.
Okay. And that can be because we like it, or because that's what we feel is what people are going to like. Does that matter at all?
It really doesn't, but you could say because of, if you're looking for a finding, you could say because there's been some negotiation with property owners, we feel that it still meets the intent of the general plan or something like that, but your finding is up to you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do we need a finding that the applicant has given testimony that option number 2 is what he prefers at this point?
You're probably fine with the 4 findings that you've already made in the staff report. But if you want to include something like that, you're more than welcome to.
How do I include that, Cortland?
That's really entirely up to you. If you would like to amend your motion, probably ask if a friendly amendment would be accepted by everyone. You can do that. Let's see.
Can we ask, is that what the applicant wants? Do you want option 2 or do you want option 1? Good.
Okay. I'd like to amend my original motion to include an additional finding that the applicant prefers option number 2.
Do I have a second on the motion? Second on the motion to amend.
I'll second it.
Do we have to vote on the motion to amend, or can we just,
If you're doing a motion to amend, you vote on that first.
motion's been made, and then we have a second, and now we have a motion to amend the motion, the friendly amendment. The second's been made. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any more discussion on the motion for recommendation of option 2 in the recommended options based on the findings in the staff report and on the finding that the applicant has requested option 2 be their requested option? So. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
In recognition of John's concessions, I vote aye.
You vote in favor or opposed? I'm
In
sorry,
favor.
I might have come a little bit quick.
In
for you.
favor.
Okay. So, Marta, that's 5 in favor and no, so any opposed? Would be none, no opposed. Okay. All right. With that, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. If someone wants to grab Commissioner Wampler.
Invite her to end and enter the chamber.
All right. Is there any public comment for items not on the agenda? Please state your name and where you're from.
Good evening, Ron Gleason, Eden. I've been attending these planning commission meetings for well over 15 years. Most of the time in person, a few over the phone, the use of Zoom. And this is the first time I can recall where public comment was not allowed for published public hearing. And I find it personally offensive. I wasted my time, wasted my money, come down here to give input, and I'm not allowed. Staff and the applicant was able to look at things and come up with new questions and new issues. I've done the same thing. Now I haven't been given the ability to present them and ask questions. So I ask in the future, if it's the public hearing, allow the public to speak. If you're not going to allow them to speak, state it up front so I don't waste my time. Thank you.
Please hold the applause. Any other comment? Looks like we have a hand online, or maybe that's not a hand. Okay. Not seeing any more comment. We'll move to remarks from the planning commissioners. Anybody have any comments? All right. Planning director report, Rick.
I mentioned all my information in the pre-meeting. I would want you to be aware that on the agenda, there was only one item that was noticed as a public hearing, and you held the public hearing. The last item was not noticed as a public hearing because we'd already had the public hearing, just for your information.
Thank you. All right, Cortland, you have anything for us?
Nothing further.
Right. So with that, we'll adjourn to a work session where we will have discussion on moderate income housing.
Do we want to have this in this chambers or do you want to go in the back? Okay.
Rick, do you want to introduce our planner?
This is Bill Kobabe. He replaced Scott Perks and he's working on long range projects. And one of his first projects we've assigned him to is a moderate income housing, which is fitting because he came to us by way of the state. And at the state, he was in charge of overseeing all the area's moderate income housing plans that we would submit to. So he's actually with us now. So, and we're glad to have him.
Welcome, Bill. It's great to be here. It's great to be in a place where people know how to say my last name. It's not often that happens. So I don't know how much I need to get into this. You guys are familiar with the general plan amendment process. We're actually looking to adopt this as an addendum to the general plan. So I don't know. Do you think some history would be good to talk about the history of HB 462? So in 2005, when the Land Use Management Act was adopted, LUMA was adopted, they set forward, the state legislature set forward a list of things that counties and cities need to consider with regard to affordable housing. Fast forward to 2018, and the state was looking at the situation regarding affordable housing and decided that the section in state code addressing the general plan elements for affordable housing needed to be kind of retooled and tightened up. So they changed that and made it mandatory for cities to select and counties to select 3 different things from the menu items. And there was a total list of 26 different strategies called the menu items that you could choose from. And in 2018, they mandated that we select at least 3 of those. Fast forward to this year, and HB 462 was passed, mandating that cities and counties adopt not the previously adopted language, but the new language in HB 462, which gave more teeth to these strategies and made them more action-oriented rather than just things like consider changing the zone or think about, or just more action-oriented. So as a result of that, we have to look at the way our current general plan reads and adopt the new language as reflected in the HB 462. In addition to that, we need to do implementation strategies that are specifically related to those strategies that we've adopted. So these implementation plans relate to the strategies that we've selected as a county. What I did was go through the existing general plan and identified those strategies which have been adopted by the county and find a way to fit those into the best strategies. So I picked the strategies from the state code and found a way to make the existing general plan fit those strategies. Buddy with me? Okay, thanks. So you can see on page 1 of this document that the strategies that are picked are these 7 items that appear on this first page. And then the letter that follows that is the state code reference to which strategy it is. So the county has already adopted these in their general plan. The new language is adopted in bold here on. In the subsequent pages, I go through and identify where in the general plan those are adopted. Look, press, giving specific page numbers and explicit reference to the general plan. Charlie has made me aware that general plan for West Weaver that I was working off of is outdated. So I'm gonna have to redo the West Weaver ones, but that will be done next week ahead of their planning commission next week. The real thing that I would like input on, and if you have any thoughts or concerns about any of this, is each of these strategies have an implementation timeline. That is what the state is really going to focus on to the reporting requirements for this year. And then in subsequent years, we have to show how the timeline was met. I tried to be as general as possible, knowing that a lot of these strategies and subsequent implementation plans will require
adaptation and will require participation from things that are outside of the county's immediate control. So making them more like plans rather than specific time frame oriented requirements seemed like a better strategy for me. But if you have things that you'd like to implement or ideas that you'd like to see included in there as far as this implementation strategies goes, I would appreciate your input. So the state is mandating this. Yes. This is the county. It would make sense to and say, let's get this one done by this time frame so that you can meet the requirements of the state. Maybe whittle away meetings or something, have a small work session or see if we can work through some of them. Then you can have a goal, right? You can meet your goal at the end of the day. Yeah. So that would work for several of these strategies. Many of them, though, are outside of the control of the county. So we as a county planning commission can't go in and rezone property without the, well, I guess we could. That's probably not the best. So let's just say, for example, one of these is apply for a partner with an entity that applies for state or federal funds or tax incentive. I mean, that's like a LIHTC, right? LIHTC financing. So yeah, so that funding could come into play here in this under the idea that LIHTC is developers use LIHTC funding for their projects, and we could partner with them to help them.
Bill,
Yeah,
do me a favor. We've been over moderate income housing a little bit. This is a lot of great information. Give me kind of the big points of what you'd like to accomplish tonight in a general, this, and this, and then maybe we can start there.
for sure. What I'm really looking for input on, and because again, the bulk of this text in here came from the already adopted general plan, so we don't need to revisit that. What I'm looking for is if we were to go through each of these implementation timelines and maybe tighten them up a little bit, maybe provide some additional guidance for the county or for the county commission and for staff especially, so we can get those targets in place and work towards them. If you've got anything in mind, like I said, I kind of put some general thoughts down about how we could get to this, and those are reflected in the implementation plans for each of these strategies. But if you have thoughts or input on any of those or how we could tighten those up and provide that, that's what I'm asking for.
So if I can reiterate, we want to look at, for example, the rezone for densities necessary to facilitate the production of moderate income housing.
Yeah.
We want to look at your timeline that you put here. Beginning in 2022, Weber County will identify areas for potential rezone, including the Wolf Creek development, Liberty, and other villages. These efforts are current and ongoing, and the FB zone has already been implemented in the Old Town and New Town, Eden, and Nordic. Zoning changes will take place per the proper measures requested for the general plan goals maps already adopted. So if I understand that, because we went over these a couple of weeks back or so, you want a more specific date of when we'll have this done with that, or what is it that would be?
So this is kind of what I was getting at, where we work with developers to change the zoning on their property according to their timeline at their request. The county can go in and change the zoning of those properties, but typically it's initiated by the developer or the property owner, according to the general plan. So the general plan has already set aside these areas noted as being places of higher density, and those efforts are current and ongoing. So what we would do is and again, this is part of the strength and part of the reason why I left it as open-ended as I did, is that as these developments take place and as the zoning change requests come in fact, we just had one tonight, right?
we can then go in and say, at each year's reporting timeframe, we have changed the zoning for these properties amounting to this number of acres, which would allow for X number of units and X number of affordable housing units. That makes sense?
Are they asking you to act on it? Or are they just asking asking for you to have a plan in place when the occasion arises that somebody wants to rezone or update?
It's both. And that's why some of these strategies are a little bit easier to put a specific time frame to, some of them not. Having a plan in place to address these concerns as they come up is a first step. And then they want to see an implementation going forward each year of how you did and how many acres got rezoned and how many different properties, how many different applications did you process. Those are the yardsticks they're going to use to measure to say whether or not a particular strategy and implementation plan has been successful.
So, in my opinion, getting a TDR ordinance in place would be a big thing to help these move forward.
Absolutely.
So speaking on, I think what you put there in the timeline is exactly how I would view it, as we do it as the zoning changes take place. Do we need to be more specific than that?
Well, if you have other thoughts, it's been recommended or suggested rather that some of these things could be given a more specific time frame. Like, I don't know. This is
When you say some of these things, are specifically talking about number one.
Yes, specifically talking about number one, I don't see that there's, because again, we wait until developers and property owners come in to change their zoning when at their request and according to their time frame. So yeah, number one, I think is pretty well.
Well, in the master plan, right? The Ogden Valley master plan, or yeah, all the different villages that have been created and stuff is essentially what's allowing for this to happen now.
Yeah.
So I would say that's in process and moving forward. I don't know, you can't really do much unless you rezone somebody's property.
I like the way he put it, is basically we'll put it for their request. As it goes, we'll kind of ask those questions. Somebody, as it comes up, can we, we did do that on this recent one, I'm sure that, we asked, you want to rezone to the development overlay zone. Have you looked at doing moderate income housing? I don't know. I'm guessing that can be put in that zone, so I'm sure we can talk that comes about with the subdivision agreement, or
No, usually we look at that as part of the rezone, encouraging them to do that. But if we want to put that in the ordinance for subdivision, we can do that. But right now, it's looking more at a legislative issue. for the item.
This would be similar to item number 3 or E, where it says create or allow for and reduce regulations related to internal or detached accessory dwelling units in residential zones. Again, like Charlie's pointing out, the county has really taken progressive and I wouldn't say aggressive, but definitely forward-thinking steps to address these kinds of concerns and allow for accessory dwelling units much more than many communities around the state already have. So as you guys have addressed these concerns, you've opened the door for accessory dwelling units. That's fantastic. It's ahead of the curve on a lot of that. So that's fantastic. And again, the door is open, so how many people choose to use that door? I heard from Cottonwood Heights, is that the state that's Lord of there, and they laughed about it. And we changed our ADU ordinance to allow for these accessory dwelling units, and we've had 2 in the full year that we've had it on the books. Partially, that's just getting the word out that these things are available, but the other part is that people just either have it or they don't want it, you know.
So speaking of ADUs, I think we might want to revisit those ADUs that we did. You remember that?
Yeah.
We did that, and I know for myself, I was somewhat just at where we were going with that, and I think it might be good to revisit that and maybe because we closed that in the where you can transfer it from pretty heavily. And then in our discussions for TDRs, we opened that back up.
Yeah,
It kind of needs to be the opposite.
we're monitoring that right now. And visit with the commissioners, and they want to, the county commissioners, and they want to see how many people apply for them in the next year. Because historically, the national trends show that only about 5% of the population actually takes advantage of TDRs. And I've actually experienced that firsthand because I put a TDR above my garage, and the cost to do that is not economically feasible. And in most communities, the restrictions they have are very tough to get them in, and it's not developer friendly. And so it costs a lot. And Ogden Valley, no exception, but even Ogden Valley has put more restrictions on it because you have to transfer a development right in there for that unit to be there. And so we're monitoring that right now, and we will be coming back to you with some of our findings on that. I think the intent was to open the door for ADUs and see how it actually worked. And right now we've only had maybe, I think 2 ADUs. And so we've had very limited people take advantage of the ADUs right now.
I know we had the one, and then we had to change the rules because he did
Right. Yeah, because they were transferring from higher to lower. So yeah, we are going to be looking at it.
I think we should relook at that. Let's call them ADUs.
Yeah, I'm a little.
TADU.
Acronym use right here.
Because they're 2 different things,
Yeah.
which I was confused at.
Don't you have to have a TDR to do an ADU?
But they're 2 totally different, yeah.
Right, so you gotta find someone else's unit somewhere else and put it on your property.
Is that 80, that option A that doesn't require TDR, is that adding more density into the valley? Yep, because you're not having that TDR. And our valley general plan says no.
Oh, a couple of comments. First of all, general plans are intended to be amended every 5 to 7 years, or so, to meet new circumstances.
Yeah.
There is, okay. Another observation, there is reality and there is non-reality. Reality is the law of supply and demand. You can't make something more affordable by making it more expensive. Okay. If we're going to have ADUs, and I'm thinking of as an example, young couple just got married, they want a small place over the garage, Rick's garage, to as their first home. They don't have a lot of money. That's what they need, a place to live. If Rick's got to go buy a transfer development right because his garage is not attached to his home, we just made it more expensive. You can't get there from here. That's what I'm concerned about.
And it makes Rick's home, his existing home, more valuable because it's got that right associated with it and an ADU that's associated with it as well. So Rick's house, which may have been, I don't know, $500,000 before, now is.
Well, I think the idea of one benefiting because his home is worth more is a phantom. It's a non-reality. The reality is if your home is worth more, look at your tax notice, you're paying more taxes, but you have to have a place to live. And if you, oh, my house is worth a lot more, I'll sell my house and buy somewhere else. And then you go looking and everything is as expensive as your house. So you didn't gain anything. So there is no value, I don't think, to having your house, quote, worth more. But how do we get places for people with lower incomes to live if we don't make them less expensive? So I think step one is you don't require an ADU for an TDR to have an ADU. You're providing a benefit to people. Now, short-term rentals, that's a whole different subject.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
The concern I have is if you have an ADU, are they gonna make you, is the moderate income housing authority, whatever, going to monitor that, like put people in that, or can you put your own people in it?
As far as I'm aware, there's no regulation or requirement either from the state or from the county. I might be wrong on that.
Because like the stuff we were looking at up at Nordic, they would want control over the lower income housing up there so that they can place people in those that
think it-
qualify.
In this scenario that Charlie was putting forth, that would depend. So if we were to do a transfer, that option he was putting forth would say that they would have control.
And that, to me, that's
If we
not good.
We would, not that he was just putting it forth as an option.
I mean, you probably want to be able to put your family in there because they can't afford a house, you know.
Yeah, which is still moderate income, but you want to keep control.
But you
over it,
want to
right?
keep control of your own property, right?
Highly
Yeah.
offensive,
It's
the
good.
idea of having some governmental entity regulating who goes in your ADU.
Yeah,
Now, there is the reality that STRs can eat up all the ADUs. So we need the STR ordinance. We need that with some teeth in it, where you can and where you can't.
For sure.
That's for sure, or we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
But STR is critical and we
Yeah.
are working on that. Just a fact.
Is that on our agenda anytime soon? I know the general public in the valley, it's a hot topic. It'd be good to put it to rest, I would think.
Yeah, that will be coming before you shortly. We're working on a few things with the different agencies to make sure that they're honoring their previous bids that they submitted to us, and that will be coming before you.
I guess there's a history to that. Why don't you tell us the history? Because I believe we put a plan before even I was around.
Yes.
For STRs.
Yeah, you guys have already looked at it, approved the language. And then when we took it to the county commission, they said, let's hold off on this for a bit. And they want us now to start looking at that. So we've actually called the different people who had submitted bids at the beginning of the year. They're basically short-term companies who monitor short-term rentals. And we're in the process of making sure that they're honoring those bids, and we're doing that currently. And then we will take that probably to the county commission in a work session, and then that will come before you with some of the modified language.
So on,
Yeah. Yeah, they've kind of mentioned that there were some changes to it and they would like you to see that is the vibe that I've been given.
Bill, what I'm responding to is these pages aren't numbered, but it's the
Yes, I'm
third,
sorry about that.
the third page. This is under 3, and it's the third option down. Residential development principle 1.2, manage accessory dwelling units to allow for affordable housing opportunities without increasing overall impact. I like impact there. It's different than density.
Right.
But then the last sentence in there, require 1 development unit for each authorized ADU. That's where I'm having a problem. You can't make something cheaper by making it more expensive.
And you can't, you can't develop out additional properties. And you're not helping the situation just by shifting things from one place to the other. You're just helping Rick's rental rate go up and not.
By the way, I'm not renting out my ADU. It's for my kids to stay in, just.
Anyway, we need affordable places for young families to live.
It's a fair point, and I wasn't here for the conversation surrounding how this got put into the general plan in the first place. So I'm a little bit behind the 8 ball on that. You guys are ahead of it. I'm behind it. But trying to understand how this got to be. And as I think about it, this was geared towards reducing overall density in the county, to preserve open spaces and keep places from developing out that otherwise you want to keep for view sheds and for just open space and green space, which is a worthy goal. But that doesn't help this particular goal meet the needs of affordable housing. So there may be a little bit of a conflict there. And ultimately, we make a recommendation to the county commission to make a final decision on any of this stuff.
So I think that I agree with most of what you said, other than I think that TDRs do help with this. It may not get to the income that they're looking at, but if we have homes clustered, they're going to be less than sprawling. Right? I mean, I can potentially afford a condo before I can afford the big sprawling.
30,000 foot.
Yeah, so I think it does help in some ways, provide with this higher lower prices. So kind of getting back to it, what feedback do you want? Which one do you want to talk?
Well, we don't have to go through this all tonight necessarily. I don't know if you guys, what your time frame looks like. We could pause and have you guys email me responses or.
What I want to do, but he agrees, is I want to accomplish what it is that you need to submit your report.
Well, that's kind of a funny thing too, because we're waiting for the state to respond to our initial report, which we're pretty sure is not, because it doesn't have the updated language of HB 462 in it. So we pretty well know that it's not going to be accepted by the state. We're waiting for a letter from the state that they're required to send that says we're not in compliance with the code. And then we have a 90-day window to take care of that. So we do have a little bit of time to review these things. But my time frame is yours. If you'd like to go through these, specifically looking at the implementation plans as outlined in here, we can go through these one by one and talk about them if you want. I'm just trying to work on your time frame, and if not, we can. We've got them now, and we can take them home and digest and respond with comments and revisions, and however you want to do that. I know you just got this tonight, so.
These actually are very similar to the things that Charlie's been working with us, so we have seen this quite a bit. Is it not the exact same thing you've been showing us? It's more detailed, it looks like. So Rick, my guess, my clarification is I was under the assumption that we had to get something submitted to apply for some level of funding.
So this does affect funding, but we've already got our foot in the door. We're just waiting for them to give us feedback. We're just trying to get ahead of the game because we like to do that. And
Because we're
so,
awesome. Yeah.
yeah.
But
But
timeframes are really short with all of this. So October 1st was the initial reporting deadline. Then they have a timeframe to get back to the cities and counties with their assessment. Their review. And then we have a certain timeframe to get back to them. So the idea is that because of my experience working at the state, specifically over this reporting program, we could get a jump on our reporting as get a better product.
And where we deal with two planning commissions, that's why we want to get a jump on this because it takes more time. So really, if you guys could take this document, give us, maybe if we give you a week, we give comments back to Bill on this. And then if we don't see anything major, substantial, we bring it before you for a public hearing.
I will say that as we've seen these going over each of these strategies and the different parts of the general plan, bring up a lot of philosophical conversations about whether or not an ADU is appropriate with the TDR and those kinds of things. Because of the time frame, we're looking really to focus on the implementation plans themselves and not skip the philosophical conversations, but keep them in perspective so that we can push these things through. And then we can retool and get back to some of those significant points that need to be addressed with the general plan going forward. Funny, working at the state, I had a very clear view into how these things get pushed through. You know, legislature passed the bill and then the state had EWS had put out the reporting guideline, templates, all of that for June 1st, or July 1st. And then by October 1st, all of the cities and counties were supposed to report. There was something like 82 reporting cities and counties. Then the state has a certain time frame to review all of those and spit them back out. And then we have to respond to all of that. So it's a big mess. And we're trying to get through this as efficiently and quickly as possible. That's why we went through the existing general plan and pulled things that we thought would fit the strategies as outlined by HB462. So again, just try to stay focused on the implementation plans and guidelines. It doesn't need to be a big science project at this point. We can get into the sausage making later. But for this particular homework assignment, please do just focus on that implementation timeline piece. And we can kind of go from there.
Okay, so I want to clarify, I'd like to clarify, these are the same ones that we identified earlier, right? These aren't new. Because we sat down, we did a work session and you gave us all these ones and you asked us which ones to focus on. That's these, right? They aren't different. Just want to make, they look the same. I just want to make sure.
I will say this, they are different. If you were to compare the exact language, and it's, Charlie and I went back and forth on whether or not it had to be verbatim. The state is looking for this language because it was adopted in 462. HB 462 said, thou shalt use these languages. And Charlie, you're saying
Different, you're talking about different from the general plan, right? Or are you
Yes,
talking
that's
about
why we
different
have to
from what Charlie says? Because he sent us something like this that we reviewed from that bill.
Right.
Yeah, the mix.
yeah, okay, so yes, okay, thank you. You have seen this. And yeah, it's not sufficient to say it's close enough in this case. It has to be these specific things. So, yeah. At least yes, yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I was. Okay.
Okay, so to put this in the right pigeonholes in my mind, we're under the gun. We got to come up with something to satisfy the state. We got to fill the squares.
Yeah.
But then the elephant in the room is a lot of these things are incompatible with the general plan as it is now in the Ogden Valley. For example, number 7, create a program to transfer development rights for moderate income housing. It's not going to work.
Well, and for
Now, in some communities, it might work.
for the reasons that you just outlined, that they're not gonna work. It's because it makes things more scarce and more valuable, so.
Okay, so what we have the immediate fill the square thing, and then we've probably got a duty as a planning commission to look at what will work, what will actually give us more healthy community in Ogden Valley. And that's a mixture of housing types and affordable housing, because that's healthy community. And so how do we accomplish that? We probably ought to be in the back of our mind, moving toward the front, looking at a general plan amendment that's going to make these things compatible. And
And from what I understand, and this is in the implementation timeline on the very back, the very last sheet, and again, I apologize that my page numbers. The very last sheet, the implementation timeline says that we're looking at changing certain aspects of the code. And it will we've already started on doing that surrounding TDRs. And the conversation has already been going, and we're anticipating sometime next spring for that to be ready to roll out. So that conversation is reflected in what we're reporting to the state and will continue to happen going forward.
And the big inconsistency between the present general plan and this is the general plan is being interpreted to say you can't have any more density, when actually you need maybe more density, but we want less impact of that density. So it makes it a healthier community, a more livable community. Okay. I've got my pigeonholes filled. Thank you.
You're right on, sir. Thank you. Other thoughts or questions or concerns for me?
So we have a week to get back to read this and make comment to you about the implementation plan. That's what you want us to focus on.
Yes, please.
What is moderate income?
That's a loaded question.
No, it's a simple question.
It is a very simple question to answer. It is 80%. Well, actually, it's that's affordable. Affordable income housing is housing that people making 80% of the AMI, which is the area median income. It's 80% of that. So
And what is that number? Do we have a number? 63?
So that's affordable. Moderate actually takes you all the way up through 110% of the income. So that would be 70,000. So that's moderate income housing. This is not affordable housing, because affordable housing is 80% or less. This is, and again, this is looking to cast a broader net, pull in a bigger sphere of things aside.
So wait, affordable, sorry, is 80% or less, and moderate is 80% to 110. Is that what you're saying?
No, moderate includes everything all the way down from 110 all the way down to 0.
What drives?
Wait, may I jump in? I'm looking at CLUDMA, and in this context, the definition of moderate income housing is housing occupied or reserved for occupancy by households with a gross household income equal to or less than 80% of the median gross income for households of the same size in the county in which the housing is located. So I think in this context, they have defined moderate. I don't see a definition for affordable in CLUDMA, but it looks like moderate is less than or equal to 80% of the median gross income.
There you go. That's it. We'll go with that. Why is it?
You know, to me, it just seems that if you're talking about the Ogden Valley, the market drives the prices out of range of moderate income families.
You're absolutely right.
You could drag a 30-foot motorhome or trailer into the valley, set it up, and now you're going to sell it for 4 times what you just paid for. Maybe that's a poor example, but I just don't see how you get around the market. How do you control the market?
That begs the question, do we have to address it in our area? Or does it have to just be in the county?
So the short answer is yes, we have to address it because it applies.
In the county
It
or in
applies to
our
the
area?
county overall, and as these general plans relate to both the Ogden Valley as well as West Weaver, we do have to address it. We have to look at it. We have to address it. Now, there are, and the subsequent years reporting for the, according to HB 462, takes into account market conditions that say we couldn't accomplish any of these things because market conditions are thus and such, therefore it's impossible. Just to put it in your mind, the simple math around an affordable housing thing is, if the AMI is $80,000, you basically triple that. That's how much you can afford for your housing, for your home. So if you triple $80,000, you can afford a home that's what, $240,000. I would like to find even an acre of land up in the part of this, 240,000. I'd like to know that.
Right.
I don't think that's there. And if you, as soon as you build a house on it, it's worth $1 million. So, people like me and Charlie and Rick that work for a living, you know, where are we going to live? I don't know. I honestly don't know. These are things that are outside of, again, they're outside of the control of the county. The county doesn't build houses. The county doesn't own property to build houses on. And the county doesn't have subsidies that they can give to homeowners to live. Ogden City does. Ogden City does that. You're familiar with that program with Ogden City. But we're not there. And I don't know how, if or when we're ever going to get there. Ogden Valley and West Weaver's not a whole lot better.
I'm confused. So you're saying the county has to address it. We reside in the county. However, when it comes to needing to put moderate income housing in, say, the valley, right? So ski resort, lakefront, whatever it is that a self-imposed from the county that we need to put it there, or it has to be in the county? Right? I mean, I'm hearing you say we need to address it, but I'm wondering if that's we as in the county.
So,
or we Ogden Valley.
Yeah. When I say we need to address it, we need to address the requirements of HB 462. We don't need to build housing. We don't need to subsidize things to the point where we're bankrupting the county. We don't need to tax people into oblivion. We don't need to do any of those kinds of things, which you've seen other places and which frankly just don't work because market conditions.
Right.
We need to address what the county can and should do within the realm of what the county can and should do. And as outlined in HB 462, and plan for these things so that when affordable development wants to come in, we've reduced some of the regulatory barriers.
So if I can recap for you, we need to have a plan, and the market may not allow for the plan to work, but we need to have some sort of plan.
To satisfy the state, we just need a plan. We don't have to implement it.
Well, yeah, you have to implement.
Victims of your own success. And we see that, honestly, we see that in the Ogden Valley. Ogden Valley is immensely beautiful. It's an incredible treasure, and it's someplace that people just want to live. As a result, property values go up. As a result, lower income folks have a hard time finding a place where they can live.
Is there any land in the valley that the county or some sort of municipality owns? Like we were talking about how, is it Ogden City owns that land over by Stringtown Road? Is there any other land out there that's owned by a government or a municipality of some sort? Mm-hmm. Okay. Can we? Well, it's just a matter of, I don't under, every time we've, even with Nordic, when we discussed them, 10% or whatever, they need to, they're just going to give back the money or do whatever to the housing authority. I'm going to mess up the language of it, but, and then the housing authority is supposed to then take it and at some point possibly create affordable housing within a mile of the resort. If every single piece of that property within a mile of the resort is private owned land and will either now or in the future have some sort of mansion on it, they're not going to accomplish that. And it's all, a sham. But if we can just simply, and I know no one wants to downzone anybody, and that's not what I'm suggesting, but if we can find some land, obviously preferably owned by a municipality rather than private landowners, and say, great, this is where affordable housing goes. And we put a bunch of apartments or whatnot, and the staff of resorts and the golf course and whoever else in the world needs to have affordable housing. So I just don't see, we've talked about it a number of times, the money doesn't work, but the numbers don't work, right? For a private developer in the valley to buy the land and create something that they're not going to make their money back on. No one's going to do it altruistically. And so, maybe I'm looking for a unicorn that doesn't exist, but if there are various pieces of land, can we start looking at what rules are put on them? So you mentioned something about either state or federal land, but they have restrictions on them or various things. Can we start looking at those restrictions? Can we start making calls and seeing whether or not there's wiggle room? Because the state wants us to have affordable housing. It's not going to happen market wise. And if the state or cities or whoever owns pieces of land, can we look at those? Mhm. No.
I want to be, I don't, you said that I don't support trying to downzone someone or an area. I don't think that's the right move, is to try and pick an area. And I don't think the people that live in that area that we would pick would appreciate that either. So I'm more inclined to let the market pick if there's an area and an incentive for it that we have, which we're trying to, things we're going to encourage is incentives for that type of thing, like we did with Nordic, as small as it was. I think that's, if I'm not, am I the only one that feels that?
Downzoning, I don't see how this gets done. If we just wait around for someone to build it, like we've talked about, it just doesn't, the money's not there. It costs too much to purchase. To build
Rick,
affordable housing. And how do we, you said, because there's been the talk of not wanting a government official to oversee it. How do we make sure it maintains a moderate price and not? Okay.
Okay. Does the county not get housing tax credits?
I'd have to check into that. I think
Because the states, the cities do.
right. Yeah, I'd have to check into the county. I know the cities do, definitely. We are very blessed to have the housing authority because that allows a mechanism for this to actually happen. And so Nordic is one small example of where we've done that. But when we start looking at rezoning properties, we have the form-based code developed in Old and Newtown, even, but when we actually start seeing those rezone elements happen, we'll be doing the same thing in those areas. And we'll probably be looking at more density in those areas because we're getting into more of the core of the valley. So that's going to be a real test when we get into those sections, and then we'll take advantage of the housing authority that we have. And we don't have to recreate the wheel because we have the housing authority and they're going to help us. It's a mechanism that's there, so why not take advantage of it?
Seems like for purposes of this Bill of Square thing, focus on things that are doable in the valley, like page 3. It's the first OVGP, page 28 thing. Develop cluster ordinances that will allow for mixed housing usage in compact areas consistent with village area locations. Okay, that seems like it's doable. That works in the valley. But something like create a program to transfer development rights for moderate income housing. You can't get there from here. So don't focus on that. Pull it out or put things in that would work in the Ogden Valley.
That's the kind of thing, that's the kind of feedback I'd love to have.
Yeah. Yeah, but there's a bigger list than what we have here, right? Yeah, so from the huge list, maybe go revisit the huge list and say what would actually work in Ogden Valley, rather than including things that obviously are really difficult.
I want to be clear about what's driving this too. There is a narrative on the state level that is being driven by certain parties that, and I'm not going to get into it because it's political and I'm yeah. But the narrative is stating that the problem with affordable housing stems largely from unfair and unrealistic regulations that are imposed by counties and cities on the development community that makes it both onerous and time consuming and expensive. And that expense gets passed on to the ultimate homeowner, which we all know developers don't bear the brunt of that. It goes to the homeowner. And that makes the price value of home, land, state too expensive. What's driving the narrative? County. This statute fair.
And we can say that's an outgrowth probably of the cost of a new home regulation percentage being 25% a couple of years ago, and now it's 34%. We're going the wrong way.
So what the hope is that can be, okay, implement then we go back to we did what you found. Prices haven't done. Not the central code, not money. We lowered things. Subs change. We all know that it's and related.
Yeah, I would disagree with you. Yeah. I mean, you look at John Lewis, who's just been through the ringer to try and get something done. Of course, he's going to want more money. I mean, I'm not saying that it's one where that's. At the end of the day, if you're going to undertake something, you're not going to do something as rigorous as what he's trying to go through for next to nothing. And that's just the fact, right? Because it's not worth my time.
The reason why he's presenting.
Yeah.
But I'm suggesting regulation now. Well, these kinds of things are like
maybe when you think in terms of fee, but you think in terms of how much that cost in time and effort.
Well, no, that counts all of the impact fees, all of the related time. You know,
Well, what about the cost of, so for example, I come forward and try and get a moderate income, a low income housing development put together. Think about what that's going to do to me and my standing in the community and how I'm going to be thrown under the bus and written about in the newspaper. It's not going to be worth it unless I can make some money. Yeah. And so I disagree that it's not a big part of it. I think it is a part of it.
I think it
and
is.
We need to do something to make it as easy as possible, but at the same time, try and have quality planning. So yeah. I think what you've got here is good. And I understand the concern that transferable development rights is kind of it being for moderate income. They may not make the most sense, but at the same time, it does encourage, because if I can transfer that from here to here, and then I can build a more cost-effective condominium, or whatever, that's where it makes more sense. it's a part of our overall plan. I don't think it's bad. So I
the-
think we've got a good plan.
That's the point of this whole exercise is to figure out if the counties and cities are the sticking point. And if they can do things to help mitigate some of these impacts that they're having, great, let's do it. I don't know any city or county that wouldn't be in favor. As long as our own costs are covered. But yeah, we'll see.
One final short question. Bottom of page 2, last paragraph. It talks about the concept of community sustainability. What does that mean?
Page 2, which page 2?
It's
page-
number 2.
Page
So
2,
look at number 2.
last paragraph,
Okay.
second line is facilities must implementation 3.1 facilitate a mix of new construction in keeping with neighborhood design standards and community sustainability. What is community sustainability?
The way I would, what that reads to me is that we have a community that's ski based, for example. We want to sustain that community. That community design of that community feel.
For sure.
I don't think it's meaning in environment or environmental. It's just, whatever buzzword. I think it's more sustain it as it is,
These
not.
West Weaver plan things have been changed, and so don't get too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Probably-
and along that line with sustainability, we'll look at farmlands and just by clustering and transferring development rights, we're preserving the farmlands and we want to sustain our farms up in the Ogden Valley. So, that's part of it as well.
Except they don't produce anything.
Well,
We're
yeah,
paying property taxes.
yes.
And I see when I read that, I thought this is more like livable community. It is, it's not something that's going to turn into a slum in 50 years.
Right.
It has mixed uses. It has young people, old people, regular middle family people.
It's like we're turning.
Yeah. And when you get in, and when you get into the village core of that, of Old and Newtown Eden, it's going to be walkability, it's going to be parks, it's going to be being able to walk to government services, being able to walk to shopping. So there's a lot of things when you get
Some
into
level of
those
public
village
transportation.
cores.
Which is consistent with reducing impact of density.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Well, I think we're gonna try and get out of here. Unless anybody wants. All right.
It's not just
a final thought.
trials.
I'm not married to any of this, so if there's anything at all that you think needs to be revised, or please just be brutal as you can.
Thank you.